welcome to chapter 1, first official chapter. I did technically read the intro already, but we're trying to figure things out at stopping points, so it's easiest on us periodically. The idea is to do roughly 2 chapters per YouTube episode, podcast episode, whatever you want to call it. It's literally just releasing the book information, but we're still winging it. So, chapter 1. Here we go. All right. Cheesy quesadillas. Just a heads up, most of these will have goofy titles or like riddles that you have to figure out, and obviously by the end of it, you'll figure it out. So, just as a heads up. Chapter 1. Cheesy quesadillas. I have a serious tendency to overthink a lot of things in my life. I couldn't tell you whether it has to do with the way God wired me specifically or if it has to do with childhood trauma that turned into an overactive coping mechanism. Not that I'm blaming God if it is that way. He configured the inner workings of my brain, but sometimes it does seem to do me more harm than good. I know for a fact some of you can relate, don't lie. I also tend to get incredibly excited about something way too fast, without actually thinking through the process itself and what it consists of. Then we come to a point where reality usually smacks me upside the head, and I'm forced to stop and sit still, finally. To be completely transparent, it happens more often than I would like to admit. For example, take playing any sort of instrument like the drums or electric guitar. I always get super excited and start trying to go all out, looking for places to buy the equipment, gear, follow all the YouTube and Instagram experts. Usually, the money part is where I get tripped up initially, but then it's the aspect of time. Do I even have the literal time to put the necessary effort and practice into this? That answer is, more often than not, a very confident no. Photography and video editing are other examples. I think one of the coolest things to do for a living would be to travel to all the most extravagant places on the earth and take all the screensaver-worthy photos and time-lapse videos ever. Not to mention, at the surface level, you are being paid to go on vacation all the time and simply make sure you take your camera with you. How awesome is that? Again, to my unsurprised disappointment, there is much more to it than that. There are a million different types of cameras, camera lenses, attachments that go on these cameras, and nowadays, they're as complicated as a rocket ship to someone as clueless as I am. All I expected it to be was a zoom in and a zoom out button, maybe a button to help get the blurriness to go away, and another button to turn the flash on and off. I had no idea there would be so many other buttons and special functions on the camera itself. And don't even get me started on trying to learn how to Photoshop and edit video clips together to make them look like an actual professional shot them instead of some amateur kid itching for adventure. I know exactly what I would like for it to look like in my mind, but I am absolutely lost when it comes to getting that vision out of my brain and into a full-fledged product. This instance was very similar to the video editing excitement I had gone through many times before. This time, though, I had to follow through. I wanted to actually make something this time instead of goofing around until I magically had something I could show off to the world, make $1 bajillion dollars off of, and then disappear from everyone. My guy, Alfonso, you'll probably be hearing about him a lot. He's the brother I never had. Growing up, I should probably clarify. But he also works here. Shout out to my guy. Appreciate it. Was competing in his very first bodybuilding show in a couple of months, and I wanted to make an appreciation video for him to keep him going when things got difficult. For those of you who aren't familiar with what goes into preparing for something like that, let me tell you, it's a lot. And no, I've never done it myself. But after witnessing up close and personal the attention to detail and everything from food intake to training to cortisol management, cortisol being your stress hormone, amongst a million other variables, I can assure you it is no easy task. And as you might imagine, the closer you get to show day, the more difficult and tedious everything becomes. The final week, adequately named Peak Week, says it all. Every single detail must be nailed down this week. Every last-minute adjustment has to be made. Pre-show jitters, stress levels, excitement to compete, all of it peaked. The idea for the compilation was to get a bunch of our close friends to make a quick selfie video saying how much they appreciate him, recognize his hard work, and wishing him good luck at the show. Once I thought of doing so, I knew it had to be done one way or the other. My current list of tools consisted of a relatively new iPhone, extremely limited video editing skills, and even less of an idea about how I would get it all pieced together into something that didn't look like I made it on my iPhone in 10 minutes. I had the perfect vision in my head and nothing but imperfect tools to work with. After doing that obvious bit of quick inventory, I knew I would need some serious assistance with this. I reached out to a few people for help on the video itself and began making a list of people I knew had to be in the final cut. Before I go any further, I'll admit to this. This video was an enormous project, and I greatly underestimated what it would take to complete it, let alone make it look good. Shout out to all of you who helped me with it. That list is too long, so I'm not going to go over it. One of the people I initially reached out was a newer friend of mine, but she seemed to know a thing or two about editing in Photoshop and all of that. Reason being, she did that stuff for a living. I wasn't sure if she would automatically decline because it seemed like I was asking her on a date, so I was a little hesitant to ask at first. But the more I thought about it and ran through my other possible options, the more I was certain it had to be her. Can't explain it, but I was certain. I was determined to get this video perfect, and I was not about to let my overthinking ruin it. So I was straight up and direct with her. I messaged her and said, "Yo, let me take you to lunch somewhere. I'd really like to pick your brain on some stuff for something I'm working on." She agreed, and we proceeded to debate on where to eat for, I kid you not, a week and a half. We finally decided on a place equally far away from both of our houses and met there. I had only eaten at this place once before, and work had paid for it, so I just ate whatever they ordered. She was a regular compared to myself, so I let her order first. Then, once it was my turn, I just told our server that I wanted what she ordered. My friend looked at me like I was crazy and asked me why I didn't look at the menu to find something I might actually like, just in case I didn't end up enjoying what she ordered. She ordered the cheesy quesadillas. Who in their right mind doesn't like some cheesy quesadillas? That's right, nobody. Technically, there was a choice of chicken or steak quesadillas, and I chose chicken for mine. I was going to leave that part out initially because once you start giving people too many options, they start thinking too much about the wrong things and completely miss the point. I simply responded with, "I'm trusting you. If they suck, it's all your fault." And I shrugged. Just a little bit of humor for her, but I don't think our server thought it was quite as funny. Oops. They ended up being pretty delicious, by the way. If you guys ever end up going to Industry on May Avenue for a meal, the cheesy quesadillas are a solid choice. Tell them Anthony sent you. They likely won't have a clue who I am. Then they'll look at you like you're a crazy person. It'll still be funny that you tried. So totally up to you. While waiting on our food, my friend asked me why I wanted to pick her brain. What could she possibly have for me to pry out and use? I began to list off a couple of ideas I had about the video, and she was all about it from the very beginning. She asked me what my first step was going to be. I told her it was to take the smartest person I could think of out for quesadillas, suck up as much information as I could, and hence the meal for two that I planned on paying for. Quick tip for the young people reading this, or listening, watching, either one. No one's time is free. The sooner you realize that and begin treating it as such, the sooner things will start moving in your favor. Your time is a valuable resource that you can't get back in any way, shape, or form, as is the case with everyone else. Don't be so selfish and take that with a grain of salt, because on the flip side, if you only use people for something in return or treat every interaction as some sort of transaction, things won't go over well. No one will want to be your friend, and people will stop answering your calls and text messages because they already know you're just trying to use them for your benefit. The next couple steps mesh together into a bit of an organized mess. I had to start gathering a list of people who needed to be a part of it, a list that initially started small but unsurprisingly grew to be enormous. The material was next. What should I put in the video exactly? Music, videos, pictures, memes, etc. Was there a line? Who was going to see any of the video itself besides Alfonso? Once all of that was determined, what in the heck was I going to use to put it all together and make it look somewhat presentable? I didn't have a computer of my own at the time, so that was my main concern. Like I said, it was as like I said, I wrote these words and this is ridiculous. Like I said, it was as unorganized as organized can be. It wasn't any further than a note on my phone. My friend asked me what the problem was. Everything sounded fine, and it sounded like I already had a plan, so why was she being involved? Not that she minded, but it seemed like everything was under control. I told her I had no idea how to do any sort of video editing. My picture-taking skills were mediocre at best, and the only halfway decent skill I had was making memes. Yes, I was totally serious for that. For the older folks reading this or watching at home, you can legitimately make money that way. Not that I've ever tried to do so, but I knew how to make them so people would get a good laugh, and it is definitely a possibility. So she smirked at the meme comment and then asked me if I had heard of Lightroom. I had not. What about the Premiere app? Also no. So she showed me what these two things were, gave me a brief tutorial on how to use them, and told me that was all there was to it. It sounded, to me, entirely too easy. There was no way creating pictures and videos like I had seen before was so simple. But it was. She had just proven that to me, and I began to realize that I may have been overthinking everything. Shocker. And then she said it. You are way overcomplicating all of this. It's much simpler than you are making it out to be. I admitted to that and just sat there with a dazed look on my face. At that moment, our server came back with our cheesy quesadillas and a fresh refill for both of us. There's water for myself, no lemon. Lemon's gross. And a Sprite for the lady. After saying thank you to our server for everything and settling into our meal, I finally spoke up and mentioned that I had more things I wanted to do after the video was complete. Essentially in the same territory of editing, writing, photos, etc. Quote-unquote creativity, I guess we could call it, to group everything into one statement. I still sort of cringe as I write that. I hate claiming to be anything that I am not. Whether I am in the process of becoming whatever it is or not, it just doesn't sit well with me. Nowadays, everyone is something, or they claim to be at least. Look at anyone's Instagram bio and you'll see what I mean. And more often than not, that individual is the exact opposite, or they are only insert adjective here, so whatever's in their bio they claim to be on social media, and that is it. They're just there for the likes and comments and nothing further. Everyone is always so focused on a title these days rather than being who they say they are. They are more focused on looking the part than simply acting it out. She asked me to explain further, more details and why. Then she asked me something that annoyed me so much. She questioned if I was serious or not. I thought to myself, the nerve of this woman. Why would I even be here if I wasn't truly serious? So I spoke up and responded with the latter part of my thought, and she continued to come at my throat with, it sounds like you have a lot of excuses and not a lot of initiative or actual drive to do anything. Tried to defend myself with my ignorance and my quote-unquote lack of in multiple areas. She would not accept any of it. She pointed across the table at my iPhone, sitting face down, and asked me what was really stopping me from doing any of the things that I wanted to do. I had no answer. I just sat there with a half quesadilla in my mouth, grease running down the other half onto my almost cleared plate. She continued by saying there wasn't anything wrong with wanting to do things I mentioned, not even if I had zero experience or prior knowledge. The problem was that I wasn't actually doing anything. I was just sitting there with a long to-do list of entertaining ideas, but I wasn't executing any of them. So for starters, I needed to stop making excuses for myself, pick something, and just get started. Just start. I knew that. If I've heard those words once, I've heard them a million times. YouTube videos, Pinterest, Instagram, you name it. I even used it myself to tell other people how to begin working out. I always said not to focus on all the possible training methods, different diets, how many days to go a week, etc. You simply had to start, and the rest would eventually figure itself out. So it was not at all something new to me. But it hits home a little differently when someone you trust says it to your face and means it. I knew she was right, and I knew it was really that simple. I laughed out loud, actually. I don't remember that part. Oh well. I paid our bill, including a larger than usual tip because we had been at our service table for much longer than I had originally planned. Again, other people's time is valuable. Pay for it as such. I walked her out to her car and told her I appreciated her for calling me out like that. I wasn't going to be wasting any more time. Afterward, I drove home in silence. Not literal silence. The music was playing through my car speakers. I just wasn't listening and singing along. Rapping along, excuse me. It would be much more accurate in my case. Like I usually would. I was going through the list on my phone mentally, one by one. Which item on the list would be the first one I tackled? Writing. Not necessarily the most glamorous option, but certainly not directly related to any of the topics we had discussed at lunch, but it was something I could get started on immediately. No camera or laptop necessary. The very notes app I used to make the list of topics to discuss over lunch was perfect. I always had a thing for writing. English and reading were the two classes I breezed through in school. Not to mention the two teachers I still remember and credit for making a lasting impact on me were my 7th grade reading teacher and my 8th and 12th grade English teacher. The English teacher was the same guy. I had him in junior high, and by the time I made it to my senior year of high school, he had transferred to the high school the year before. I don't even know how that worked out, to be honest, because as soon as I walked into class on the first day of senior year, we both looked at each other, laughed, and said, "You again?" at the exact same time. Shout out to Mr. Helton and technically Mrs. Grissom, but she's Miss Green now because she got married, so shout out. You guys are wonderful. He always knew how to push me to be better. His assignments were never difficult, and in fact, I could usually BS one of his papers the night before and get a pretty solid grade the next day. To my disappointment, he quickly started to figure that out and began singling me out on purpose. At the time, it was annoying because I absolutely did not care. It was my senior year. I was trying to focus on after-school plans that day, the book I was reading that week, and my plan for college in the coming months. LOL, foreshadowing. I was not by any means trying to be some sort of professional writer. Funny how things work out the way they do, huh? Because here we are. I still have the ability to just type out some nonsense in a matter of minutes, but now I always go back over it a million times to see what I could change to make it better. Vocabulary choice, punctuation, sentence flow, all of it. I don't even recognize myself sometimes, which oddly enough bleeds into my everyday conversations nowadays. I'll stop and have an out loud monologue with myself right in front of a person I'm talking to until I'm satisfied with what and how I say things, which by now has gotten me plenty of weird looks, but most people do actually seem to appreciate the effort. Of course, I always want to make sure I'm understood appropriately, but I also enjoy coming up with a better way of saying the exact same thing. Going through those bit of flashbacks on the way home, I knew the easiest way to just start was to start with what I already knew. It was a small start, but it was a start nonetheless. Most people worry too much about what happens after you finally get started to even get started in the first place. Like thinking about how far a distance running a marathon is and then counting yourself out before you even try to do the first necessary thing, taking the first step. One foot in front of the other, pace yourself, hydrate, etc. Each step may be small, but it also means that the finish line is that much closer than it used to be. Once I settled on writing, I knew I needed to think of a way to get my writing out into the world, to where the public eye could see it all. A blog was something I had attempted before but never actually got off the ground. I decided to try that again, but with a different outlook on what I wanted it to consist of. It would be more so a journal of my thoughts than anything. From there, I would just let it morph into whatever it needed to be. Something that Alfonso and I talk about a lot between each other and our closest friends is not forcing things. I wanted to make sure I got into the habit of writing and posting my blogs regularly, but I never wanted anything to feel forced. If you start forcing things, it just becomes another job. It also comes across as ingenuine to your audience, whether that be readers, viewers, followers, whatever you want to call them. They can see and almost feel that you forced it without even mentioning it to them. So as I just said, just let it happen. I wanted to try maybe once a week, but I never made a concrete commitment to that because I knew sometimes even once a week would be a hassle. You have to set some boundaries so things don't get out of control right from the get-go. The moment you begin dreading the work you used to love is the same moment you need to take a step back and look at how you're doing things. What is going on to make you feel like that? Is it the requirements you set for yourself elsewhere, or is it something else that takes up your free time that you would rather be spending on on-set activity that you always look forward to? The only person who can fix that situation is you and no one else. Adjust your time and schedule accordingly. The first quote-unquote lesson or whatever would be to stop worrying about everything that accompanies ideas, wants, and curiosities. Cut out all the noise going on around you. Don't focus on what will or will not happen. Just focus on doing. Focus on action. Whatever it is, don't worry about what people will say or think. It's so simple, anyone can figure it out. Grab you some cheesy quesadillas and get going. And remember, the people who discourage you from doing so are people who never had the courage to start on their thing, and the fact that you're going for yours makes them feel insecure. That isn't your responsibility to worry about, so don't. You don't have time anyway. You have your own world to conquer. So just start. Alrighty. So that was chapter 1. What was that, like 13 pages? So I feel like that went well. I didn't mess up as much as I figured I would, but yeah, again, I'm still working on this. Listening to myself and hearing myself talk as I go through each chapter, even though I wrote the words. A little distracting, but also it is still a million degrees in this warehouse currently. So again, shout out to Sean because I really appreciate this. All this equipment is literally way out of my league. So super appreciative that I'm even allowed to use this stuff. But I should probably say like buy rice and grinds. Scream of rice, buy it. But the person who helped me with that, her name is Michaela. She actually owns a tanning salon called Sinless Tan. She and I have grown closer over the fact that I put her in the book, got a lot of approval. Most people I mentioned in this, actually, I should probably say all of the people that I mentioned in this book, I got permission just because you never want it to be people's names are very personal to them. Some people take it more seriously and you don't want to just name drop and then not be okay with it. So just make sure that anytime you do anything like this, unless it's like a podcast and you're just shouting your buddy out, make sure you ask for permission because that's the professional way to do things. And always just make sure that they're aware of it so they don't just get blindsided by somebody who was like, oh, I heard about you on somebody's podcast or whatever. And they're going to be like, well, that's kind of weird. Just make sure you have the appropriate relationship from both sides. just because you don't want to just like name drop someone thinking that they're your friend and then it's like super weird for them. So shout out to Michaela. Appreciate the help. Like I said, among a list of numerous people helping me out with that video, she just basically told me to get off my butt and get to work. So much appreciated. If you need a tan, go to Sinless, I guess. But that is that is chapter 1, and we are going to start chapter 2. But I have to go to the bathroom, so we're gonna take a quick break. So chapter 2. It's called Danimals Crush Cups. I don't know if you guys remember those, but they're just essentially just yogurt cups that you crush. So literally like self-explanatory. But again, you will figure out why they're called that and why I named the chapter this. Let's get to it. Danimals Crush Cups, chapter 2. So when writing this chapter, the most common theme I kept coming across in books I read, podcasts I listened to, or just daydreaming of what I would like my future life to be like was delayed gratification. Sounds like a rather fancy term for what a simple idea it is. The easiest way to define it is to delay or put off your immediate wants and desires for something bigger and or possibly better later. It doesn't have to involve money, but that is the easiest way I personally know how to describe it. My first experience with the term delayed gratification was utilizing it even before I truly knew what the heck I was doing. For those of you my age, and especially more so with the males that I grew up with, you guys know about Call of Duty, and more specifically the map packs they would periodically unveil after that year's initial game was released. That particular year was my freshman year of high school, and the Call of Duty for that year was one of my personal favorites for mostly nostalgic reasons, but I definitely didn't hate it like a lot of people seem to. Nostalgia because it was the first Call of Duty game that I ever bought myself with birthday money that my parents gave to me 3 days early. Most Call of Duties come around like November-ish, and then my birthday is November 12th, so usually that's what I asked for back when I played video games, but just as a heads up for you people at home. Anyways, also, it was nostalgic because I finally had my own PlayStation 3 of my own to play on. Shout out to my high school best friend, Riley. I think at this time, his wife is like about to have a baby, so shout out to you, my guy. Miss you, bro. Let me know if you need anything. Before that, I would either have to go over to a friend's house to play it, or I would just watch gameplay on YouTube. That wasn't the worst thing in the world, but there's a massive difference between that and actually getting to play it yourself in your own house, talking on the mic with your bros. It was a social hangout with a fixed cost, required minimal work to plan, and paid for itself in a matter of hours or days, depending on how much you used it. The map packs alone were another $15 a piece on top of the minimum $60 you spent for the game itself. To some of you, that may seem like a bit of a ripoff. Maybe it was, but for my particular group of friends, the release date for those map packs could not come fast enough. The hardest decision we had to make about those days was which snacks and drinks we were going to have locked and loaded on the table next to our chairs for refueling between games. Man, the flashbacks of pure joy and contentment that I'm experiencing while typing this, or I guess technically reading this, those were literally simpler times. Like, miss those days. But anyways, back in those days, you could do a thing called game sharing. You are no longer allowed to do this, or at least not to the extent that we did it, because Sony, the company behind all of PlayStation, discontinued the platform function. For obvious reasons, of course, which you'll understand when I finish the next little bit of the story. Game sharing basically means you could share your purchased content with another user. All you had to do was get the user's login name and email. Then you would log into their account on your system, go to their PlayStation store, and view all of their previously purchased items. Once you scrolled through and found that you were looking for, all you had to do was click the download to system button option and wait for the magic to happen. The trick was that the content itself had already been purchased, so from there, all you had to it was just a matter of downloading the files to your computer, which is essentially what the PlayStation 3 was, a big box of technology that gave you the ability to play video games. Now, if you think about the situation from a 13 to 14-year-old's perspective, it's just a cool way to share games with 4 of your other friends. 5 was the most times you could download one item, and obviously you being that 5th person, meaning everyone gets to be a part of the fun and you save a little bit of money between yourselves. No harm, no foul. Now that I am much older, I can easily see why Sony discontinued this function. My friends and I were deliberately cheating the system, and in doing so, Sony was only making $15 off of a product that should have been making $75 off of. You think about it, a $60 difference isn't that much to a company whose worth was easily in the multiple millions. Actually, as I wrote this, I looked it up and I was way off. Their average revenue is in the trillions because obviously they do more than make video games. But we'll say their net worth is somewhere in the billions. So that being said, it makes what we were doing seem even less important. The tricky part was the fact that at least 50% of the kids at school who played Call of Duty were doing it with their friends too. And if my school knew how to do it, then other high schoolers knew how to do it too, and college kids, and even the adults who still managed to squeeze in some much needed gaming time between working and or family time. So naturally, as any even somewhat literate company would do, they stopped allowing those types of things and functions to happen. I believe the limit is down to just 2 separate operating systems being allowed to have the same account information. When Sony initially announced the change, you can imagine the uproar, but it's no longer my concern. I no longer play a lot of video games. Around the time that I started my first approximately 4 tries on writing a book, I sold my PlayStation 4 to a kid from Facebook Marketplace. The system, a couple of games, including the most recent Call of Duty game, and 2 controllers, went to a kid who looked like he could get way more use out of it than I would. Once I was finally honest with myself, it only proved to be a distraction for me. No more excuses or stalling on writing this bad boy. Back to the lesson though. Game sharing, my friends and I would all take turns being the buyer. Most of my friends would simply ask their parents for the extra money, so they always were happy to volunteer when it came to their turn. I, for one, could not do that. Money was tight around my house at the time, and even if there was extra funds to indulge with, I knew my parents weren't going to be super psyched that my chosen method of aforementioned indulging. I believe it was the second to last map pack of the year that was about to come out, so I knew between myself and one other friend to get it, I knew there was no way I could manage it in time. So I made sure I privately discussed it with him. He understood completely and stepped up to the plate. I was forever grateful to him for that because it gave me time to think of a plan. I always believe that the best time to figure anything out is when you have no other option but to figure it out. When your back is against the wall, you start to think of your wildest and most creative ideas. It took me a few days to really think about it, being that I had absolutely no source of income. I wasn't old enough to work a real job yet, so that was out of the question. I couldn't just ask around for money from my peers either. That's one thing I absolutely refuse to do to this day. It's definitely one of the most uncomfortable and demoralizing positions to ever put yourself into. Begging is never pretty. Now, I know that asking for help when you're truly in need is a totally different and by no means same thing. This was not one of those situations, obviously, because it's a video game. Like I said, you get most creative when desperation is running in overdrive. It finally came to me one day, walking back to class following my lunch period. I hadn't been all that hungry that day, so instead of getting the typical tray of food for lunch that was $3, I got a bottle of water and a snack bar. Total for that gourmet meal, just $2. I was fumbling around in my jeans pocket for a pencil and felt the remaining dollar instead. I was confused for a second, but then I glanced at the half-full water bottle on my desk and it dawned on me. This was it. The solution was right in front of my face the whole time, but sometimes you don't always notice it. For lunch money each day, my dad gave the 3 of us kids $3 each. Lunch was $3, so that was what we got. We never missed a day. Extra money for lunch was never something we discussed, so I never thought to ask why it was just $3 or whether or not more was a possibility. It made sense to me, so I said thank you each day and headed out the door. What we chose to do with that money once we got to school was up to us. Naturally, getting the full tray of lunch that I had the money for was always what I did. Once I figured out that there were other options, the wheels in my brain started turning faster than ever before. I tried to think of what other snacks there were that I could eat and survive off while saving at least $1 each day. It had only been my first trip through the quote-unquote snack line instead of the tray line, so I wasn't quite familiar with the array of options we had. After probably a little too much thinking, I told myself I would just have to wait until tomorrow and look at each option at their price. I was in algebra class and missing half the day's lesson notes already. I couldn't afford to miss more of it and then to have to explain to what math I was actually doing instead. I tucked $1 away in my wallet and finished the day like normal. The next morning, everything went as planned. Wake up, get dressed, eat breakfast, get my $3, and head out to school. When lunch period came around, I made a beeline to the snack lane. When it was my turn, I speed walked to the refrigerated display cart and let my eyes wander across all the bars, chips, candy, and everything in between. Then I saw them. Bright red yogurt cups called Crush Cups. And you could get 2 of those bad boys for just $1 single. That was it. Those would double my profits, and I could have my money saved up in the nick of time for the next map pack coming out in a matter of weeks. All I needed was $20, and I only had 19 more to go. I can totally do this. I bought the yogurt cups and pocketed the remaining $2. $17 to go. Initially, I told myself I wasn't going to tell anyone about my plan. One, I wanted to be sure I could actually pull it off in the first place. I didn't want to sign myself up for the role of map pack buyer prematurely and then come up short. Also, the reason behind my particular method was a little embarrassing. Nothing screams poor and desperate like starving yourself for a stupid video game. It wasn't stupid to me, but I wasn't in the mood to try and defend myself to anyone else, so I kept quiet. Eventually, my friends caught on, though. I went from wolfing down my tray lunches each day to walking around with yogurt cups that you could eat without silverware by crushing the yogurt into your mouth. They asked why I was only eating that much, and at first I told them I wasn't hungry. That worked for about a day. My friends knew something else was up. By day 3 or 4, I couldn't cover it up anymore, so I broke down my master plan to a couple of guys in my lunch group. My friends laughed at the pure genius and combined stupidity of my plan, but commended me for making sure I did whatever I had to do to keep my portion of the game share agreement alive. And every day for the next 2 weeks, my friends would sit down with their tray lunches, and I would sit down with my red yogurt cups. I always finished eating first. Imagine that. But my friends occasionally offered me part of their tray lunch. Most often, I would decline because I wasn't about to have 2 of us starving for just my plan. But on dinner roll day, I always snagged one if it was offered. Mild interruption. If you have never had cafeteria dinner rolls, or if you have and don't think that they have been made carefully with the lunch lady's magic touch from heaven itself, you are wrong, and you don't deserve to taste that deliciousness again. That is actually in the book, but I probably would have made that mild interruption myself because that to this day is still true. So I just want to clarify. But anyways, right around the 2-week mark, I hit my goal. It was a Thursday, so I still had one more school day before I could make the trip to GameStop with my friend to purchase the PlayStation gift card that virtually purchased the map pack. Friday at lunch, since I had all my money saved up, I took my $3 back to the tray line. I bought my first tray lunch in 2 weeks to the usual table and sat down at a half-occupied table. Each of my friends who were already seated stopped talking and looked at me and then my tray. They all asked me if that meant what they thought it meant, and I replied with a massive grin and a yes. Everyone laughed, clapped, and I received a couple of fist bumps as well. I had done it. That night, I gave the cashier at GameStop that next night, I gave the cashier at GameStop $20 in all $1 bills to pay for my PlayStation gift card. I held onto that gift card with a vice grip all the way back to the house. Some of the most memorable $20 I've ever spent in my life. To this day, I don't think I've ever worked so hard for just $20 in my life either. This may seem a bit dramatic, but as I said before, delayed gratification is essentially putting off what you want now for something else that you want more, or maybe something you want more of later. Immediate gratification would have just been following routine, falling in the tray line, getting my usual lunch, and then just hoping by some miracle the last map pack would be bought by someone else, someone who would technically have to take a second turn and then hopefully still want to share with me. I chose to delay the gratification of a full stomach from a solid lunch so that I could have what I wanted more, the map packs. But that is ridiculous, but video games, I'm sure you get it. It seems so small now that I work full-time, and buying anything that is $15 is essentially more of a should-I conversation with myself than a could-I conversation. Back then, though, $15 was a lot of money to my 13 to 14-year-old self. So the fact that each PlayStation card started at a minimum of $20 and went up to $50 and $100 options was astronomical. Having that extra $5 in my PlayStation virtual wallet made me feel like I was king of the world and could buy anything I could possibly want. Nowadays, anything that's worth $5 in the PlayStation Store is either a game that's like 20 years old or it's like a remaster that's not worth your time. So that is wild the more I think about it, but got it done. Money isn't the only tool we need to learn to use delayed gratification with. It just so happens to be the most obvious one, and oftentimes the hardest. As I write this sentence, I'm only just now learning it myself. It's harder than it looks, especially if you never had anyone to teach it to you directly. It applies to everything in life. Though. Money, school, work, relationships, all of it. The easiest way to think about it is to plan for things. Make a list of things you want in life, whether it be material possessions, career choice, spousal wants and needs. Then think of where you are right now in comparison to all of those. What are you doing now on a daily basis to achieve or prevent those plans from coming to fruition? Now adjust as necessary. And think of the crush cups. That was the Animals Crush Cups. Honestly, personally, I think it's probably one of my favorite chapters just because it's completely just obnoxious, the lengths I had to go to figure all that stuff out. But also, I did it. So that means, it's a good reminder for myself that I can also, we have stickers just for the YouTube watchers. We have stickers if you want them. But you can do anything you put your mind to, even if it's dumb to everybody else. That does not matter. It is if it matters to you, that's all that matters. Like, period. So that being said, to this day, I don't remember the last time I played a video game. So it is a really funny lesson that I thought of when it came to like deciding whether I put it in my book or not. But delayed gratification is one of the just simplest but most important lessons that anyone and everyone needs to learn, especially nowadays with all the prices of everything going up. You want to make sure that you are adequately prepared for anything that can happen. So that is the lesson for that chapter, is just make sure that you're not ridiculously irresponsible with money, and also make sure that you know that you're capable of anything. You just may have to get a little goofy with it and a little creative. I guess that would be a good word. But yeah, that is I'm gonna call it as episode 1. That is officially the first 2 chapters of the book. I'm going to be reading through the entire thing. But just to make sure that every one of you who wants to read ahead, just make sure that you are aware, and don't forget that the book is on my website. If you want to read ahead, it's technically available on Amazon too. And then it's on like Prime delivery, so you can get it in like a day or two. But I don't get as much of a piece of that. Obviously, Amazon takes their piece. So that's totally up to you. But also, if you get it from Amazon, I'm not going to be able to sign it. So if you want it signed, either come find me or you have to order from my website. But that is episode 2. So again, thank you to Lauren, because she's just like suffering in this heat with me. But also thank you to Sean for allowing me to use this glorious warehouse full of delicious Rice Krispies and cream of rice, so I can get this produced and out. So that is it. I'll see you guys in the next one.